Yeah, you can see people are joining us.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So,
Well, let's kick it off.
why don't we wait for orders from James?
Okay.
Because we had like 700-800 registered.
Wow.
And I can see that we've been joined by
221.
Yeah, so give people just a minute or two.
Yeah, maybe another 20 seconds.
Sure.
And then we're good to go.
Sure.
We already had somebody send a greeting from India. Hello. I'm glad you could join us all the way from India. Wow. Well, there's Orla Adams. Hello, Orla.
Hello, Orla. Great. We're looking forward to it too. Okay, Stephen, Joel, I think we can go.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second episode of MI and Beyond. I'm Joel Porter, and I'm pleased to be here again with my good friend and colleague and mentor in many ways, Steve Rolnick. I'm here in Gold Coast, Australia, and tonight we're going to have a very, very lively, interactive, variety show of sorts, and we're going to be talking about empathy and sport. Two things that I think both Steve and I really have a lot of passion for, and for sure. So, just a quick introduction of me. Like I said, I'm Joel. I'm a clinical psychologist. I live in Gold Coast, Australia, with my family. I've been practicing psychology for a long time. And also have been doing motivational interviewing training around the planet for about 20 years. Most of my work has been in and around working with people who are trying to overcome and understand addictions and how they fit in their life and their relationship with it. And right now, during this time of the pandemic, I'm getting the opportunity to kind of recalibrate some things and some thinking about my career and where to from here. So Steve and I had a moment where we thought, why don't we do this? And so here we are. Steve, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Joel. My name's Steve Rolnick, and I grew up in Cape Town, South Africa. I'm speaking to you from Cardiff, Wales, in the United Kingdom, where it's early afternoon. And thanks everybody for joining us from really all over the world.
Cool.
I came over from Cape Town, South Africa, trained as a clinical psychologist, have been here ever since, but frequent trips back to Africa and to South Africa. And I'm one of the co-founders of Motivational Interviewing. I've retired a few years ago, and now I'm working with a lot of passion and interest and some confusion in sport. And I must say that in preparing this webinar, I did quite a lot of work diving into all sorts of ideas and concepts, and it raised lots of interesting and challenging questions for me. And so I'm looking forward to this webinar because we're going to end up discussing them, I hope. And so welcome everybody. Let me hand you over to James Lawrence, who you'll see on your screen, who's really masterminding what is for me quite a complex business. Over to you, James, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So my name's James Lawrence. I grew up in the UK. I now live on the Gold Coast in Australia. I do marketing for a living, and I was introduced to Stephen and then Joel through some work I do for a company called SiteQuire, who produce online courses. And it's through that work and helping to market the motivational interviewing course that I was first introduced to Stephen and then Joel, and volunteered to help out with these webinars. So it's fantastic. So many of you have joined us today, bringing like-minded people together, and it should be a fantastic webinar. So thanks for joining us. I'll just very quickly take you through some brief housekeeping points. So firstly, we are recording the webinar this evening, and we will email you that recording within a couple of days of the webinar taking place, within 48 hours. We will be doing Q&A at the end of each of the 3 sections of the webinar, so you can submit your questions via the Q&A and we will do our very best to get to your question. But please be mindful that we do have a few hundred people online tonight, so if we don't get to your question, apologies in advance, but we will do our very best. And finally, we just recommend that you turn off any Outlook, Skype, or any downloads you may have running, just to ensure you have fast internet, which will give you the best quality webinar possible. So that's it from me. Thanks again for joining. Looking forward to it, and I'll pass back to Stephen and Joel.
Thanks, James. Let me give you a sense of what's in store here. We're going to cover 3 questions in this webinar. We're going to take each one in turn. We've got 3 special guests for you, brief interviews with them. We've even got practice breaks where you can have a go at answering certain questions and practice empathizing, so to speak. And we've got prizes. And the first person who gets all 5 right is going to get a prize, and we'll let you know towards the end what that prize is. But surrounding the whole webinar is something called the Guardians of the National Treasure. And we make no apology for this. It's like empathy in action from our perspective. We've chosen a community action project, which happens to be based in Cape Town, South Africa. And we're going to pull in a request for donations to this project. More about that later. And we'll show you some videos and explain what that's about. So that's where we're going to end. But we're going to begin with these 3 questions. And James will flick them up on the screen for us in a moment. The first one is, why use empathy? Is it a force for good? I've learned a few lessons in the last couple of weeks of preparation about that. And in what way can it be a force for good? Then secondly, we're going to turn to what actually is empathy. Is it just like a feeling that you get inside you? Or can you translate it into action of some kind? And what kind of action best translates an empathic experience? And then we're going to turn to how. And for in each of these 3 sections, we've got a visiting special guest. So we're hoping that will provide the kind of variety that will make the webinar enjoyable and interesting for you. So we're going to kick off now. And the first question is, why bother? Why empathize? And Joel is going to kick us off with a story, and I believe it's a personal one, Joel.
Yeah, when we were talking about this this episode and talking about MI in sport and thinking about stories, and as somebody who grew up in Athens, Georgia, in the United States, in the South, and come from a long line of American gridiron or football players in my family with college and professional athletes, I grew up playing football from the time I could put on my shoulder pads, so I played Pee Wee all the way up. And it really hit me how the lack of empathy and hindsight was missing from the coaches. Even from age 6 years old all the way up through high school, it seemed that the goal was just to harden us up and for us to respect them, and how we felt didn't really matter, to the point of sometimes, particularly as we got older, practices becoming quite brutal and encouraging us to attack each other and to really go at each other really hard. And on the one hand, there's a place for that in a physical, hard sport like football or rugby. At the same time, in hindsight, there was actually no attempt at having a genuine relationship with the players. And the thinking was, to get the best out of us, they had to push us as hard as they possibly could and be damned any feelings we had about it. And I can remember, feeling like wanting to quit, having friends of mine quit, seeing guys in tears, and then getting ridiculed as opposed to somebody extending some compassion to them. And I just think that, you know, had the coaches know what we're starting to learn now about how empathy can be used in a very effective, non-sort of happy-clappy kind of way, that you can get the most out of people. And actually, the kids can enjoy the sport and not be afraid of it.
And how did it affect you personally, Joel?
Well, I can tell you as a parent whose son plays rugby, it certainly makes me think about, you know, his feelings and what's going on with him, you know, when times get tough and the games get lost and the injuries happen, and to not, you know, be the parent who's saying, you know, suck it up and get back out there, have a drink of water, you'll be right.
Yeah.
I think growing up, it helped kind of build this facade, this sort of, you know, this sort of jockish macho side. You know, even when I was physically hurting or you know, I wouldn't be genuine and real with it.
Yeah.
To show weakness and to show vulnerability, and it's hard enough for a boy in high school to be weak and vulnerable, but amongst a football squad and a bunch of coaches, that was a sheer weakness.
Yeah.
You know, playing with injury that I probably shouldn't have been playing with.
Yeah. So this wasn't, looking back, you can see ways in which that experience could have been greatly improved for you.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And it wouldn't have taken much.
Yeah.
Well, I take that back, Steve. It would have taken a lot for some of these men to be able to cross that bridge, that empathic bridge.
Yeah.
Without themselves feeling like they were being soft or weak. Now, I remember after we talked about this, you know, and I think this is true. And I haven't been able to verify it, but I believe a few years ago, one of my friends told me our head coach in high school died and he had killed himself. You know? And so I don't know what was going on in his life. I didn't know the man personally.
And who knows what that was about, but it's got, but it's colored your memories of your sporting youth. And I wanted to take this moment to introduce our first guest, because if there's I met this person, his name is Edu Rubio, and I met him quite a few years ago, and I've worked a little bit with him and watched him in action. And I can tell you, he colors the lives of these young people in a very different way. And Edu is a football or soccer coach in elite soccer in England. He's a UFO pro licensed tutor and more, I can tell you. And so we have a very short time here today to chat, Edu, but I believe Joel is going to link us up. I mean, James is going to link us up. And it'll be interesting to ask you, Edu, what you think of that story. But I believe he is about to come online, people. Edu!
Hello.
How are you, my friend? It's so lovely to see you.
Yeah, it's very good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, Edu. And thank you so much for coming online this afternoon.
You're welcome. No, thank you so much for having me.
Good
And
to meet
Edu,
you. I've heard a lot about you from Steve.
Hello, how are you, Joe?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing
Excellent,
well.
excellent.
Really
Good.
Edu, I mean, I presume you heard that story of Joel's.
Yes, I did, yeah.
What sort of sense do you make of that kind of experience that people have?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's not, it's something that happens very often. I mean, it's that's the problem. It's quite common. It's quite common in where, coaches, players, staff set up an environment in which, unfortunately, people are not allowed to say what they think and what they feel. And so obviously then you've got consequences like, athletes not feeling, listened, not feeling understood, and not feeling, brave enough at times, unfortunately, to be able to step forwards and ask for some help and ask for some clarification. And, I'm sure, obviously, I'm sure with your story, it's not that you didn't want to, obviously, commit to the training sessions. It's not that you didn't want to provide the passion, and I'm sure that it was nothing to do with, at times the physical content and the aggressive stuff that could happen at times in a football pitch or in a soccer pitch. I think it was more to do with creating an environment that it suits everyone, when actually everyone is unique. So how can we create an environment that suits everyone just with one style, if everyone requires different type of styles, because we are all unique and different? So that would be those were the thinking comments that were in my head as I was listening.
Yeah, yeah. And you work in the pressure cooker of competitive sport. Yeah. And you once said to me, I asked you, what's the first thing you'd look for when you appointed a coach?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember your answer, but you know what it was?
Yeah, I think it's quite relevant to this. Empathy. Yeah. I mean, that was in one of my previous roles in MK Dons as a head of academy coaching. I was obviously, one of my tasks was to employ coaches, which was tough. It was difficult because it requires skills that probably I didn't have, But yeah, one of the main things was always empathy. Yeah.
Why, Edu?
Well, with the same sort of comments that I've already made, because I generally believe, whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know, but I generally believe that it's very important to create a rapport, a connection with the athlete. And so how can you help someone to enhance their development and their resilience and their performance if you don't really understand what's going on in their minds, and if you don't really understand what's going on in their physical presence in all dimensions of themselves? And so I think if you want to help someone to really nurture their gift and really make a difference in not just on the grass, not just in obviously when they're training, but also outside, of course, because we don't differentiate between obviously athlete and person and vice versa. I generally believe that you need to connect with that person and understand that person and really see how that person can maximize their gift.
Yeah, and once another memory I've got when you were working in an academy environment, because I appreciate now you've been working as a first team coach in perhaps a more competitive environment. But you made a comment, I once asked you, what gives you the greatest pleasure and satisfaction in your work? And do you know what you said? And I'd be interested to know why you said it. You said, when I get a call from a player who's been released, a year after they've been released, saying, thank you for what you taught me about life.
Yeah.
What's that about, Edu?
Well, that to me is that to me is coaching. That to me is creating that rapport, that personal relationship with your players, with your athletes, with the staff. First team environment could be also when they go into a different club, or when they are injured and they are not in the day-to-day element with the rest of us. I think that is very important to me, and I think it's what the essence of a sport is about, and of life in anything, is creating relationships and obviously nurturing those relationships between people. And so when someone calls you back within a month, so within a year, it kind of means that there is still something in there that they've taken, and there is like a sort of like a legacy there from what the environment gave him or gave her, not necessarily myself, but what all of us as a team created in that environment while that athlete was performing in that specific football club or whatever. And so
so it's as much about what they learned about themselves as about football or soccer.
That's right. I mean, I genuinely believe that if you want to be in any work of, in any sort of industry, if you want to be obviously the best you can be in your role, in your job, in wherever, there is a fundamental starting point, which is understanding yourself, and is obviously, really working in your soul and really working in yourself and working in your true self and who you are. And so it's important that the coach knows how to connect with that, and knows how to help that person to connect with their true self, because ultimately they will be their best coach, they will be their best teacher. There's no one out there that understands yourself better than yourself. So helping the players to understand themselves, it's very, very important, and I think it's quite unique, and I think that's the way we coach and we believe in.
And what do you notice of the impact of this kind of value system and culture that you try to create on the actual competitive field of play? I know it's a bit of a crazy question, but do you notice it?
I feel that, funny enough, at times there is resistance. There is resistance because obviously there is a different sort of coaching as well out there. And so some players, some people may have grew up in different environments with different sort of coachings. And at first it's like, why the heck are you asking me how I feel? And why are you allowing me to say what I want to say? And, like if, fear was the kind of thing they expect from the coach to be able to perform, or, directions and rules. And so that doesn't mean that at times, obviously, as a leader, one has to make directions and has to make certain rules. But yeah, funny enough, there is at times that resistance. But then there is that kind of like belief that, it's taking responsibility of your own performance. And there is no one better than yourself to actually kind of be in control of, of your own performance, your own development. And when you take responsibility as an athlete, I think there is a better chance for you to enhance your game. And so when they see that, and when we create that report and they see that you are there to work for them rather than, to use them, I think that, there is something special there. And I think then things can be done and understood in a completely different dimension.
Yeah, and so even though there might be rough edges in your interactions with players because of their history, you still nevertheless feel in giving them this consistent message, and you notice the benefits of it.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's not about, or it shouldn't be about myself or the staff or themselves as such. It's about your unique gift, your person, and then the team. And so it's important to keep that consistency and kind of create that environment from day one, even though some of them might pull a face, like kind of saying, well, this is a bit like, different to say the least. But yeah, to create an environment in which basically everyone feels comfortable to say what they think and what they feel, without thinking that I'm going to be patronized, without thinking that I'm going to pay a toll or a price for sharing my ideas, that I'm going to be, that next day something is going to happen. And, it's important that you keep that consistency, because if you say, well, you can say whatever you want to say, obviously in a controlled manner and with respect, but then 5 months down the line, you cannot say, well, now you have to do this, because then obviously it's incongruent. And I think that's important as a coach and as a leader and as a team, to be congruent and to be consistent with the message from day one.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because we're going to have to stop the conversation very soon. But it's very interesting to notice how you're actually talking about using empathy to champion the autonomy of the individual, to take responsibility for understanding themselves and what this means on the field of play.
Yeah, in a way, yes, because in the minute you understand someone, then you can basically know what style of coach they might need in order to unlock their potential. Then in that moment you understand how what tricks them, what doesn't trick them, what they need, what they don't need, for them to be able to walk their own path into their journey of discovering their own potential and unleashing everything there is there for them to discover.
it's really interesting, and we're going to stop very soon, but I just wanted to say something to Edu. You know, I've watched you, right? And I've worked a little bit with you. People can get the impression, and you hear this phrase a lot, these are the soft skills, these are fluffy. That's the word I've heard in England, right? These are fluffy. And yet you embody for me empathy and action as a coach. And I don't find you fluffy when I see you on the field. You're giving people orders, you're checking things out, you're moving quickly. So this is an interesting question, which we're going to address later on in this webinar.
Sure.
Okay. Is practicing empathy mean being soft? I mean, I think it's an illusion. I don't see you as some kind of soft individual when I watch you coach.
No, but if anyone said that it is soft, it wouldn't really bother me. I mean, because I truly believe in what we do. But no, it's nothing to do with being soft or hard. It's just something to do with being authentic and being real and really making an effort to understand people and really making an effort to create a report in which, you know, the outcome is to focus on the journey of that person to discover their own gift and try to maximize and enhance their development in whatever they do. And so yeah, it's nothing to do with being soft. It's nothing to do with not being aggressive on the pitch at times, not tackling. Believe me, there is tackling, there is injuries, and the physio is quite busy at times. But it's about understanding each other and creating an environment in which, as I said, stepping up and saying what you feel and what you think is okay. It doesn't matter whether you are the coach, the athlete, the physio, whoever. It's okay because we are in an environment in which we are there to help each other and support each other and understand each other.
And so for you, a good culture is one that is free of fear. Yes. I think, yeah. I mean, fear understood as a method to control people. If you understand fear as at times a mechanism to obviously understand your limits and then be able to push your limits. Yeah. Fear is not about emotion like any other. You know, if God gave us that gift of fear, is because it's needed at times. But fear understood as controlling people, and fear as a mechanism to lead people, then yes, I don't believe in that. I don't. That's very interesting. And so I can see a webinar there on does fear motivate people, and that's for the future, Edu. You know, but listen, we're gonna say goodbye. I know you might have to go, you might stay on the line, but whatever the case, you know, Edu, thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking to you soon.
No, thank you,
Edu. That's fantastic.
Thank you, James.
Thanks so much for showing up for us.
No, thank you, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Edu. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Right, so Edu's going to leave us now, and we're going to move on to Q&A. I think that's probably the wisest thing to do time-wise. Okay. And our master James is going to help us with the first question.
So, yeah, just as a reminder, if you do have any questions, please submit them through the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So question number 1 has come in from Lim, and they ask, does empathy improve performance?
Wow. And Lim, you know, I don't know where's Lim? Where is Lim working from?
I believe Lim is in Singapore.
Right. Well, greetings to you, Lim. I can imagine it's quite late in the day. And you'll notice, Lim, that I was actually trying to get at exactly that question with Edu. And he was sort of saying, yes, it does. And I've watched him in action. But would you mind if I kind of try and answer that one, Joel?
Yeah, go on.
It's a fascinating question, Lim. And I don't think there's a single answer to it. Perhaps I'd make reference to wearing different hats, Lim. You know, if I wear a coach's hat, I would say, and it's so beautifully illustrated by Edu himself, that empathy helps a coach, an athlete, to feel connected, understood, and accepted. I think that's an observation as somebody who wants to be a coach when he grows up, right? There's not much chance of that at my age, but that's what I reckon with a coach's hat. Now you could say, well, does it improve someone's performance if they feel connected, understood, and accepted? And I would say yes. I bet you Edu would say yes. I would ask you, Lim, what would happen if someone felt unaccepted? The opposite. If someone felt unaccepted, disconnected, and misunderstood, I think it would depress performance. And I recently read the autobiography of Tony Adams, the Arsenal soccer player. And his story is one of searching for acceptance from this coach, sometimes not getting it and getting drunk. And he went through periods where his performance was depressed. Now, Lim, I could put a psychologist's hat on. I'll try to do that very briefly without jargon. Empathy is one of the key ingredients in relationship building. That's what us psychologists accept. And it impacts hard outcomes. Okay. In the world of counseling and psychotherapy, a quality relationship informed and fueled by empathy is the single most important predictor of good outcome. Okay. And in healthcare, what can I say? Kim, do you know, I've come across a paper that a recent paper that finds a strong link between feeling that a practitioner is empathizing with you and mortality. Okay, and if people are interested in digging that up, if you type mortality, empathy, diabetes into Google, those 3 words, I did yesterday and I caught the paper. So there's evidence that empathy impacts very hard outcomes in psychology. If I put a theorist's hat on, I would say that feeling connected is one of the 3 basic needs in self-determination theory, SDT. So you can look that up, but there's quite a lot of evidence that meeting that basic need improves outcomes and performance. If I put an observer's hat on, I would ask, and this is a question for everybody in the webinar, is empathy a potentially magic ingredient in teamwork? It's just something I wondered, and I don't have the answer, but I'm wondering that.
Let me hop in right quick, Steve.
Sure, go, man.
And just share a reflection on something you've said and something that Edu was saying that I think is really helpful in this conversation. One is that if I'm a coach and I'm trying to understand my player, trying to connect with my player, then I'm learning how to coach the player. And as Eddie said, when you know how to coach a player as an individual, you get the best out of them.
Yeah.
And then as people go through the process of experiencing the best they can be, they start learning more about themselves. And that self-knowledge that Edu was talking about is just a recursive, iterative process that just goes on and on and on. And it's all done through the relationship, as you were saying.
So for you, this question of why empathy is a bit of an obvious one. Like you and I do share this view that it's important, and it was highlighted by Edu. Yeah. Can I put a cynic's hat on in answer to that question and say that I've noticed, and this confuses me, I've noticed that it can be used for foul ends. That empathy can be used for foul ends. And I've been wondering about this for the last 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, talk more about that.
Well, it's used to get inside someone's head, right? I work in elite cricket from time to time, right? And you chat to a fast bowler, oh man, they're expert at getting inside the head of the batsman, okay? Somebody the other day reminded me of Muhammad Ali, who was brilliant at this. He had great capacity to empathize with his opponent, but he was using it to beat him. I notice it on an elite tennis court. There's a lot of that kind of gamesmanship trying to get in each other's head. I've noticed getting inside the other team's head is also something that's talked about.
Or even on a team sport, your rival player, if you're playing a wing and you're the other winger, If you're offensive line, it's the guy you're trying to block. You're trying to get inside their head to get the upper hand.
Yeah, and then there's something else which I can articulate, which is coaches who only encourage their athletes to empathize with each other and not the opposition. Okay, so it reinforces a certain sort of, I think it's a downside. You can reinforce a sort of a tribal identity and forget about caring about the opposition. And that takes us back to that wonderful photograph of Freddie Flintoff on the cricket field, who had the grace and dignity to lean down to an opponent and actually cross that border. So I don't want us to get too kind of happy-clappy about empathy. It's a question that still bugs me. But, you know, Joel, I think it's probably time to move on, unless James says otherwise, that there's a...
Well, maybe we could just sneak in one more, which I think will be a quick one, which is it's come from Ben Warman, who asks, how would you counter the statement, but we don't have time to focus on empathy when we need to get results?
I love it. Joel, I can speak to it if you like. I just love it, this question.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're sacrificing the future for the present.
You're sacrificing what?
The future for the present. Thinking you don't have enough time, you're sacrificing the good that might happen in the future. If you just step over being empathic with somebody because of time.
I think it's it's largely an illusion. I've come across it in healthcare where, you know, I know we've got colleagues on board in this webinar who are partly influential in helping me understand this, which is you don't have time not to listen, actually. And that the statement that I've only got a short amount of time, I don't have time to listen to people, is really an illusion. And one of the wonderful gifts of the skillful practice of empathy is that you can use it in very brief moments in a corridor, a coffee room, a car park, and it makes a huge difference in a very short period of time. And I also notice a certain social habit among sports coaches and people working in sport at all levels, which is this idea that if I don't look busy all the time, there's something wrong with me. I'm not a good coach. And you know, someone like Edu, I've watched him closely. He'll stand there quietly, spending quite a lot of time just observing. And so this idea that we don't have time and you're scurrying around, I think is largely an illusion and not very helpful. And as Joel says, it reinforces this idea that the outcome is all that matters, and that's an illusion. Actually, better performance results from paying attention to the process, not the outcome. James, I'm worried about the time.
Okay, let's move on then to section 2.
I do notice somebody put up on the Q&A the reference to the paper that I described, which is very kind of you, thank you. But I think people can find it: diabetes, mortality, empathy. Those 3 words, you'll crack it straight away. James, can we move on?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
What is empathy? And I chose this picture of Freddie Flintoff, if you could put it up for us, James. Because instead of I was going to tell a story, and I thought, actually, this picture just tells the story so beautifully. This is Freddie Flintoff and Brett Lee in 2005 in Birmingham. And this was in the crashing moment when Brett Lee fell to his knees in exhaustion and disappointment after Australia lost a game that had taken 4+ days. It really was a crashing moment. And instead of celebrating with his teammates and restricting himself just to mutual empathy, Freddie, who was is a wonderfully talented person and cricketer, he knelt down to console him. So everything about this image says, I know how you feel. And it's interesting that it involves, I'm thinking now about what is empathy. And we're shortly going to move into our interview with our next guest. but empathy sounds like it involves both words and deeds. There is this question about what is not empathy. And we'll pull apart the words and deeds aspects later on in the webinar. But you know, empathy is not a tired ritual. I don't get the impression this is a tired ritual, like a slap on the back, or I put my arm around someone, therefore I'm very friendly and I'm empathic. It's not, I don't believe that actually approaches it. It's not just about being warm and friendly. And then I thought we might benefit, I don't know whether you will, but benefit from having a look at a video of what empathy isn't. And it's going to lead us into our interview with our second guest, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmad, in a moment. But James, if you could put on this video, this is a soccer coach in elite soccer in the United Kingdom, very well known in our country. And this is him with his players, I believe, either at halftime or after a game.
Okay, can you see the video?
Yeah, we can see it. We can't hear yet, but I'm sure.
Okay, yeah, off we go.
His name is
Willow, any injuries? No. How can there be any fucking injuries? What a silly question, eh? Look at me while I'm talking. The second goal. The fucking first goal, Dad. You and Chris Billy, soft as shit. You letting him fucking back into the whole fucking day, you? And no happening. You're in fucking Latvia. You and you come off. Go and get a bath. When we've gone out. You two come straight on. And you're not as bad as any. Don't they? Don't fucking melt me like we've got no to lose now. No bit having weight. We're not playing wide. It's a quagmire. I says to you, the ball's not going to run. The first kick you have, you try bleeding, touching it, Jeppo. Why talk? Why not bother talking if you do that? The one.
okay. I think we can agree that that's not the expression of empathy. And I'd be interested to ask Edu whether that he thinks that's constructive or destructive fear induction, but I'm not going to, because I know that we're about to speak to someone who probably got an observation or two to share with us, because he knows this world well. And I will have an observation to share shortly after we say goodbye to him, because I met Neil Warnock and I confronted him about his behavior. And his answers were not straightforward, okay? But before that, we're going to have a short chat with Dr. Imtiaz Ahmad. And he is a medical doctor, a family physician, a trainer of other doctors, who also has this other life in which he works in international cricket and elite soccer as a director of medical services. So he interacts with players and coaches on a regular basis at a high level. And Imtiaz very kindly agreed to come on board. And I do feel like I want to say and acknowledge that it was a conversation with Imtiaz that drove me into sport. And so I wanted to acknowledge and thank you, Imtiaz, because it was your inspiration that made me think, wow, I want to come into this field. And so James is going to try and hook us up. And let's hope he's with us. He might, I know he's working very hard.
Yep.
Imtiaz, are you doing clinical work at the moment, Imtiaz? I think he's coming on.
I think
Here's our man.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Where is Imtiaz?
we can hear you, Imtiaz.
We can hear you, we can't see Imtiaz. So if you could click your start video button.
I believe I've done it now.
There's
There
our
There we go.
man.
Fantastic,
Hi.
thank you.
Hi, Imtiaz. Thank you so much for coming on board. So,
Thank you very much for having me.
Imtiaz, I have introduced you, and I know that you're probably working very hard as a practitioner, as a doctor at this difficult time. And you know, thank you so much for for agreeing to come online with us today.
Not at all. That's absolutely fine. And thank you for having me.
MTS, did you catch that Warnock team talk?
Yes, I did. I'm glad we're allowed to swear on this webinar now.
Sure you can.
After hearing that. No, it was good. It took me back to the dressing room. Obviously, we've been away from it for a bit of time now during COVID-19, but yes, it was very interesting to hear that. I have seen similar before in my time working in football, but I've also seen a lot of good communication as well. So hopefully we can break that down a little bit.
Johan, how did you feel about that halftime rant?
Yeah, it's obviously an emotional time. So there's different types of communication, and that's a match day communication where he's expressing a lot of emotion, almost like a frustrated father at his children. They're kind of sitting there with their heads down and not really responding. But I know you've seen the whole the whole clip, and you'll probably notice towards the end it changes a bit, and you'll see that they almost start rallying and they start clapping and they're all ready to go out when he kind of softens his tone a bit. So you know, obviously that's not a good example of empathy in the way that you've been discussing it so far. Is that close?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry, that's my daughter, the monkey.
That's okay.
Carry on.
My daughter interrupted a webinar I was on yesterday as well, so that's fine. So that's obviously not empathy in the way that you and Edu and Joel have been discussing it so far. However, I'd say in a working week in football, it's a very small snapshot of what can happen. And I do believe, having worked in football for 15 years, that sometimes people then extrapolate that and feel that that's the way communication is the whole time in football. And in my experience, it certainly isn't.
Yeah, and so you'd be worried about a junior coach looking at a video like that and thinking, oh, this is the way to be as a coach. Absolutely.
So when you're talking about Neil Warnock, you're talking about a highly successful manager. He's been promoted. His teams have been promoted more than any other manager in English football 8 times. He worked at QPR before I was there, and I've worked with some staff and players who worked with him, and they spoke highly of him. They might not have spoken highly of him straight after a clip like that, but there's a lot more that goes on behind the scenes. So yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes people look at clips like that are good to watch and look at, but I don't think you can learn as much from them as you can from actually being in that environment.
No, absolutely.
It's difficult to conjure up. Just looking at that snapshot, it's difficult to conjure up, you know, a genuine and empathic response other than, wow, he really sounds angry. You're really angry about the way the game's going. But what you're saying, what I hear you saying is there's more to it. You can't just take a moment of a scene like that and extrapolate that to an entire team or an entire halftime.
Yeah, and also I'd say if some people think communication like that can cause an impact, and I know some people believe that, certainly in football, it's a very emotional sport. There's different ways on the pitch to get messages across. You may well get a short-term spike in change of behavior as a result of something like that. But if your behavior is consistent like that every time, whether it's on match day or not, it's not going to work. So I believe in order to get away with as such with behavior like that, he's probably done a lot of good work with the players beforehand. So a lot of empathic work, built up relationships. So therefore he's got a lot of credit with the players. And so therefore when he feels he needs to kind of express that side of his emotion, he feels comfortable doing that. Again, I'm not here to agree with him shouting or ranting away about that. But I can see where there's a place for it in the environment that I work in.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you, in a way, you're saying, if you invest adequately in building a relationship with players, that gives you greater freedom to use a wide range of styles and interventions and messages, including a kind of a rant like that, because you've earned that right, because you've really got the trust of the players developed.
Yes, I think you summarised that really well, because again, I go back to this manager that you played a clip for. He's highly successful, or he has been. So there's no way he could have been highly successful if his behaviour had been like that the whole time, or he hadn't invested in the players and had that empathetic behaviour with players before.
So Imtiaz, what are we saying here? Are you saying that you believe that in investing in relationships building, using empathy is important? Is that what you're saying?
Not only important, I think it's crucial. So for me, empathy, I'd go along with everything that you both said, and also what Edu said. If you invest in empathy, it can not only change your relationship with that one individual player, but it can also then help change and develop a culture within the organization. So I think it's really important to invest in that. And for me, I think you've given some very good definitions of empathy, but I try to simplify it into trying to understand someone. If you really want to understand someone, that's showing empathy. But by understanding someone, I don't just mean understanding what he needs to do or she needs to do, but actually understanding their environment, understanding the pressures they're under, understanding what the commitments required to make it in elite sport, understanding their social environment, what's actually going on at home. I think those coaches and staff members who really try to understand someone are showing high levels of empathy. And then going along with that, you have to show high levels of care, really, really high levels of care. So not only for that player, but also for the organization that you're working for. I think if you've got those two things right, then I think you're on your way to really understanding a player, and then you can then engage and hopefully change behavior.
Wow. And having moved through and observed a lot of teams in high performance environments, you feel that you're describing a few core truths here.
Yeah, I do. I like the core truths that that you asked Edu about, and I would say so people that show high levels of care, if there's high levels of trust within an organization, I think there's some of the, and work rate and decision making, there's some of the key things that you look for within people, staff members that you're working for. And if you've got more people like that, or who've got those attributes, then I think you're on your way to hopefully having a successful organization.
You know what strikes me a little bit, Steve, is I'm thinking about the conversations that we're having, is that for a coach or a coaching staff, you not only have to hold the player in mind, but you have to hold the whole team in mind as well too. And knowing how these men and women may interact with each other with this team that they formed, and knowing how much you can push the team as well as individual players. And you know what he was doing in that clip was he was speaking to the entire team for the most part.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think it goes back to what I said towards the beginning, that there's just different types of communication. So you've got communication on match day as opposed to non-match day. What the coaches have to do on the pitch, where they have to be a lot more directive in their communication, what they have to do off the pitch. You've got your one-to-one communication. So I imagine if someone was offended by that kind of conversation, then the manager would then speak to them afterwards at the right time, one-to-one. Or they'd get a small group together, maybe on Monday after the emotions settle down, and then just debrief and talk about that episode, maybe even talk about that conversation. I've seen that happen. There's conversations in corridors, there's conversations on the phone, we know about text and social media. So there's very many different ways of being able to communicate. And I think that does all have an impact on the overall picture.
And Imtiaz, can I ask you sort of to help me solve the puzzle? You know, since you and I met and worked together, the last few years, I've noticed in coaching circles, this is not so much on the field, but in conversations between coaches, this contrast between I'm either a tough guy who tells people what to do, or what they call athlete-centered coaching, which is I let them make their minds up for themselves and I champion autonomy. And this seems to be quite a widespread dichotomy, and it worries me. And I'm just wondering what you feel about that, if you can help me with that.
Yeah, so my views are, I think whatever style you use, I do believe you have to be authentic. So you have to be very believable and do it naturally, because you're dealing with very sharp people working in elite environments, whether it's football or medicine or wherever else. So if you want to have credibility in that environment, you have to be very authentic. Then after, actually from many of the discussions that I've had with you over the years, there are different styles of communication. So there are times to be direct. There are times to have your arm around someone's shoulder and kind of be more guiding. And there's times just to step back and just let people just get on with it. I think those skills can be developed for people. So I don't think someone has to be labeled as being someone who's soft or someone who's hard. I don't go around swearing or effing and being at people in their faces, but I think I'm quite clear in some of my views. And I know you've been the same with me, Steve, at times when we've discussed issues and areas. So I don't think it's all just about shouting or ranting, but soft skills can be done by all sorts of people in different ways.
Yeah, and so for you, empathy has a place in a broader spectrum of coaching skills.
Yeah, but it has to be the base. It has to be that base because it helps you engage, it helps you develop that relationship, and then you can expand on it as you feel will, and what's best for that individual player.
I got it, and we've got to wind up, Imtiaz, because I've got my eye on the clock. I just thought I'd tell you something, which I haven't had a chance to tell you, which is I met Warnock myself, okay, because he was a local manager of the local team, which about, Cardiff City. And I had an opportunity to meet him. And he's very frank and he's very amiable. And I said to him, how is it that week after week, I've got a season ticket just behind your dugout, and I see you behaving rudely and wildly swearing at one player in particular? How come you do that? You know what he said? I said, why do you do that? And he said, this is the player I have the strongest relationship with, which absolutely confirms what you're saying. And I asked him, where does empathy fit into your spectrum of coaching? His answer was very simple and blunt. He said, I spend most of my time with players who are not picked for the match. And I thought that was a great affirmation of his flexibility and of his emphasis on the very foundation that we seem to be agreeing about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a lovely story. I do agree with that. So you build your relationship, and then you can then have those kind of conversations. And I imagine he would have then spoken to them afterwards and had a chat about it in a more a dignified way. Yeah.
So what we're going to do now, Imtiaz, is move on to okay, what is empathy? And I'm going to do that I'm going to give myself 2 minutes to do it. So at this point, I'm going to say goodbye to you visually. And thank you so much for agreeing to come online with us today.
No problem at all. See you soon. Take care.
All the best. Bye. Speak soon, Imtiaz.
Bye.
Okay, Joel, you enjoyed that, Joel?
Yeah, very much. I've enjoyed both of our guests. I mean,
okay. And we've got a wonderful third guest coming on, and I want to make 100% sure we've got time for her. So I want to ask James just to put up one slide. Okay, I tried to describe put on the slide what empathy is, and it is imagining someone's experience and then saying or do something that gets this across to them. That's about as clear and as simple. Honestly, this slide was full with 30 or 40 other words.
For the goal! What's your excuse there?
Sorry. Don't worry, James. I managed to get this onto one slide. It involves an internal experience of imagining, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Then what you do with that experience is what expressing empathy involves. For people like Joel and I, who come from the motivational interviewing world, it's something you say particular things to someone, okay? And that's what motivational interviewing is particularly focused and passionate about, okay? But you can also do things, as you see in Freddie's gesture here. So empathy is something that can be expressed in both words and deeds. And I noticed that there's positive intent there in Freddie's face. It's driven by compassion. And there was also, I think we've discussed this, there can be negative intent, guided by a desire to get one over a person, as Muhammad Ali was so skillful at. And indeed, my colleague Rory Allett pointed out that there's quite a lot of research on this ability to read someone's experience and bullying. I don't know anything about it, and Joel, I hope we're not going to discuss it, but it's well worth looking into that. So it's not enough just to imagine someone's experience, it's your motive that matters and where your heart is and the use of compassion. So Rory pointed out to me that there's a difference between knowing what it's like for someone and actually feeling it. Okay, and here we have in Freddie Frintoff a clear demonstration of words, deeds, and he clearly feels it. So Joel, I hope you don't mind if we move it on, because I'm looking at the clock. Would that be all right?
No, I mean, the only, just a quick thing, and this could be make a mental note for another webinar, is to think about Premack's theory of mind concepts, about being able to hold in mind what other people might be thinking or feeling, and that people can do that.
Wow.
Probably the connection with empathy there.
Wow, that sounds quite deep stuff.
Yeah, we'll save it for later. I just want to say that loud.
We'll take that for a walk on a future occasion, and then I won't be too involved because I know nothing about it.
Okay.
All right, my man. But listen, James, have we got time for one or two quick questions before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. And apologies that for the sound that came in just before. That was Neil Warnock just chipping in again whilst you were doing that slide. So we do have a question, which comes from Susan Walker, who's in England, who asks, "How can I empathise with someone who I don't agree with?"
Very common, super common. And Susan, that's where motivational interviewing was born, where we find ourselves disagreeing with what people were saying. And we realized that if instead of arguing back or trying to persuade someone, you put your own feelings and judgments to one side and you try to understand their experience, the conversation goes much better. So to put it bluntly, Susan, and I'm going to be brief, to empathize doesn't mean you agree with them. It simply means you put your own views to one side. And if you like, you separate the person from the problem and you empathize with the person, even though you might not agree about the problem that you're discussing.
I can accept somebody holds a belief that I don't agree with, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with the belief, or I have to, depending on the context, or I have to challenge the belief. But a lot of times, at least professionally, my job is just to understand and be curious about how somebody has come up with this belief and how
Exactly. And if you're going to solve a problem with them that you don't agree about, if you've connected with them first and you understand how they really feel about it, they'll be much more amenable to being flexible about how the problem's solved. So,
and in the process of trying to understand somebody else, I might learn something about myself too.
Absolutely. But you'll have better outcome and success with solving the problem if you engage and connect first. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder if we can move on, James, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Would that be all right?
Number 3.
Is the pacing of the webinar going okay? Am I being too pushy here?
No, we're just an hour in, just over an hour in, so I think we're in good shape.
Brilliant. Okay.
I'm impressed of you being so mindful of the time, Steve. I had backup timers and everything ready to roll.
No, it's because I'm really keen to make sure that we get a chance to meet Susan.
Absolutely, I want to meet Susan.
You know, we're moving on to the third section of the webinar, which is how do you empathize? Okay. I've got a good friend, Guy Andrel, who said, maybe people put up slogans on a wall so they don't have to think about them. And a slogan like "we care" or "we empathize." How do you move from a wall-mounted slogan into something that you demonstrate each and every day? And that, I think, is a great question to open with, to introduce our third and final cameo guest. And She is Susan Klumpner, whom I met 3 or 4 years ago, who works in the poorer neighborhoods of Baltimore and Chicago as a tennis coach with at-risk and marginalized children. And believe me, that might sound like a simple description. What I witnessed when I met Susan and heard her stories was something much bigger. And the impression I got, which is why I contacted Susan, was absolutely, she sees plenty ways in which you can demonstrate empathy towards people. And so with that kind of introduction, Susan's the CEO of something called the ACE Project, ACE. And it's a most wonderful organization. And James, I wonder if you've discovered that Susan's online?
She is. She should shortly be joining us.
Hey.
Hey, here we go.
Susan, thank you so much for coming on board.
Thank you for having me, Steve and Joel. Yeah, no, I think I just wanted to say that I think the beginning of the webinar was brilliant, starting with a personal story, Joel, because I think it's absolutely critical that we as coaches engage in, you know, critical self-reflexive processes, because I think this is really what will inform the way that we coach our youth. I think one thing that Steve didn't mention is that I primarily, so not only do I work with children that live in under-resourced communities in Chicago, Baltimore, and now Detroit, they also are ages 12 and under. So they might be, you know, I think a lot of the comments that I'll have will be developmentally appropriate for that age, but certainly this can be scaled up to a bunch of different developmental stages. But yeah, to your point, Steve, I think, you know, Steve and I talked beforehand, and I tried to narrow down, you know, maybe my 101 tips on how to show intentional empathy into 4.
Brilliant.
But I think, you know, I chose these 4 because I think not only are they perhaps the easiest to implement, but I think they apply across probably the most settings. So I think—
What are they?
We'll see if they're brilliant, Steve. So first, I think, you know, showing up consistently and on time is very important. And I think behind that sort of assumption, I think folks think, well, you want to show them that your time is important. But I think flipping the perspective on that is actually showing the youth, showing the players that you work with, that their time is important. You know, because you have no idea what circumstances kids come to your practice from, or to the game from. And I think just showing them that this is their time that you've set aside can be really impactful for kids, just knowing that. And I think the second tip is, you know, our cardinal rule of coaching is listen to your players, right? Listen to your players. And I think equally as important is listen and respond to your players, you know? Yeah. And I think it's, you know, I think athletes really want to hear your feedback. And so I think this sort of communication exchange has to be bi-directional, you know? Listen.
Okay.
Yep.
I want to interrupt you there, because just to highlight the fact that in motivational interviewing, that response is where you craft an empathic listening statement, which brings the best out of people. So I just wanted to point out the congruence between what you're saying and the verbal skill that we're highlighting in motivational interviewing.
And just to weave something real quick, is that when you do respond, you need to balance out the praise and the affirmation with constructive criticism, as opposed to just slamming somebody about what they're doing wrong all the time.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And then I think the third tip, every practice that we have, you know, we do a daily check-in, and it can be, you know, if we're pressed for time, it can be very quickly. But if we have a little bit more time, and again, I work with youth, we do a daily check-in that includes, you know, everybody around the circle puts a thumbs up, a thumbs middle, or a thumbs down. So everybody gets individually recognized, but we don't check in with each person in a large group setting. And so, you know, when we get to the thumbs up part, you know, I say, are there two people who would like to share why they've had a thumbs up day? You know, because kids are usually coming to us after their school. So, you know, two kids share their thumbs up, their thumbs middle, and their thumbs down. It allows the team to sort of talk about how their day was, and it actually allows a really great transition point into the after school space, which is when we deliver our programs. And then the last sort of tip that I have there is one that, you know, I'm a social worker. My practice background is actually in school social work. And we say this all the time in the field, you know, meet them where they're at, right? And I think this is in particular, you know, really important for now. And, you know, we haven't really discussed a lot of the implications that COVID-19 may have, you know, on practices, on returning back to the sport. And so just being, you know, keeping in mind, like, meet kids where they're at when they return to us on the playing field. You know, we might see a varied sorts of responses to that. We might see a regression in emotion, you know, a child that you are used to, you know, just put your toes on line one or something, which is something that I always say. You know, they might fight you on that. They might combat you, confront you on that. You might see a regression in skills because they haven't been afforded the opportunity to go outside because their neighborhoods are unsafe to practice. But then on the other side, you might see kids who, you know, have been practicing the entire time and can't wait to go back on the field. You know, so I think just keeping in mind that every child, every athlete is going to be coming back into, you know, an athletic space, probably in a different place. So yeah, so those are my 4 big tips, Steve.
Brilliant. And so at this particular time of uncertainty, it's all the more important to empathize and respond with these children. I mean, I love this. You know why? Because it's so brief, it's so clear, it's respectful. And I got to wonder as you were talking, in fact, all the points that you make, all 4 points of yours, why is it that this creative work you do comes to life with children, but why can't this be used with adults and even adults in an elite environment? You know, I'm not expecting you to answer it, but you do get to wonder, really.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Particularly now
coming out of, good for children, it has to be good for adults.
Yeah, particularly coming out of this terrible time of uncertainty and trauma for many people. Yeah. Susan, before we say goodbye, do you have any examples of scenarios where you felt that it was really important to empathize with these young people?
Yeah, and I wanted to sort of leave you with 2, which, you know, one example is perhaps a little bit more extreme than the other one, but I work with younger kids, and I remember this was a couple of years ago. One of our athletes, a 9-year-old, was killed in a hit and run right outside of the school building, and so obviously the whole school was affected by, you know, this trauma. And she was, you know, she was a tennis player. And I received a call that evening, and it was heartbreaking, you know, especially that this was such a young person. And because she was such a young person, it would be really difficult, I think, for other youth her age to kind of understand, you know, this traumatic loss. And so the very next day, you know, we had a special practice in her honor. We talked about, you know, and I think this brings up, there are intentional spaces we can create for empathy when things like this happen. Yes. And so we created a special practice where we played our favorite games. We reflected on some of our more memorable experiences with her, things like that. We did a cheer for her at the end of the practice, and it was sort of a way that we could process what this traumatic loss was for her teammates. And not to shift too extremely to my second example, but
Yes.
you know, and I think we need to address things when they happen. And even though they may not, you know, connect to the sport that we're teaching, we create a family in the sport,
Yes,
you know,
yes.
and for us to not address that at all would have been inauthentic, you know?
Yes.
And then, so the second example that I'll say really quick, and I see in the chat that folks are mentioning restorative justice and restorative justice in schools, and this example, this example actually highlights how we use that in sport. And so, you know, we had an 8-year-old who, you know, was hit by another 8-year-old who was swinging the racket, but really wasn't, you know, it was a time when there was instruction. So they were just like kind of fidgeting. And, you know, Michael thought he was being hit on purpose,
Yes.
you know, and so he immediately reflexively pushed his teammate, like, you know, what the heck are you doing? Like, and the other teammate responded also aggressively, you know, and we had to sort of stop a fight from happening, you know, that consumed the entire practice. And so immediately right there, sport became secondary to what we were trying to teach, you know? And so, you know, in restorative justice, we walk through this, you know, you want to repair the harm that's being done, you know, so we had one-on-one with each of the players, and we had the players talk to one another. Step 2 is we want to reduce the risk, you know, of the aftermath, right? And we want to reduce risk for the future that this could happen between other players. And so, you know, we met as a team, and we talked about how this may happen again, and how can we more effectively respond to this. And then the last step in restorative justice is empower the community. So rather than the coach always needing to step in to mediate some of these issues, is that we as a team must work together to solve these.
That's
Yeah, so.
And I was so struck by that story. Those 2 stories, actually, to be honest, I've heard. And I was so struck by this last story that I included it in the book called Coaching Athletes to Be Their Best, because I thought it was such a lovely example of the potential of a restorative way of thinking in sport, because you and I know that in education and social work and criminal justice it's used. Its potential in sport it feels massive to me. I want, you know, Susan, I want to say I just noticed a quote, a question, a comment from somebody who I admire hugely, called Russell Earnshaw. And Rusty's a coach who's been at the elite level and who's the most wonderfully talented coach. Guess what he said? I'd want Susan to coach my kids. Man, if you want an affirmation, Susan, you just totally nailed it. But look, you know, I wanted to just close by sharing this observation with you. And I think this is what Rusty's getting at, which is that normally in sporting environments that I've come across, it's like they do everything but have the conversation.
Yeah.
And I frequently walk around sporting environments, kind of, my jaw just drops. Well, why don't you speak about it? And I think it's because people don't feel comfortable in their skin to say what they think and feel, and they're fearful. And I guess the essence of coaching that you live and breathe, and that we're trying to, I think we all agree on in this webinar, is that helping, and it's what Imtiaz said is the foundation, is helping players to learn to say what they think and feel, creates more comfortable people and human beings who can then engage in sport much more creatively. How's that for a sort of a summary statement?
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Was good. Yeah. Okay, Susan, we've got to move. And, you know,
Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you.
I can,
Thanks,
Susan,
Susan.
I can see from the comments here that are coming up.
That was inspiring, Susan. Thank you very much.
And we are going to have a webinar on education. I'm busy lining that up. And so questions like, well, shouldn't you help children in education learn to communicate better? Absolutely. But we're going to have a webinar on that. But what I want to turn to now is a more playful side of this webinar. So Susan, thanks. I know it's early morning for you. Thanks so much for being with us, and stay online if you like. Joel?
Yes.
Now, what does empathy look and feel like in everyday scenarios? And you're going to challenge the people on this webinar to make some judgments. We've got James as the kind of ultimate arbiter, right?
Okay.
And I believe the first person who says, I got all 5 right, wins a prize, and we'll let you know in a moment what that is.
Right.
Over to you, Joel.
So this is the fun and game section of our webinar. And so what we want you to do is we're going to want you to read the stimulus in the yellow and then pick what you think is the best, most empathic answer. And the first person who gets all 5 right and posts their name in the Q&A will get the prize, and we'll tell you what the prize is later. So here's the first one, right?
Joel, can I just interrupt you? Some people might have images or something on the screen that prevents them from reading the question. Just move it. You can shift it if you want to.
Yes. Yeah. So let's go back to the first slide.
Okay, so we've launched the first poll and people are now voting, Joel.
Okay. So I'll read it aloud just for folks that will help. If you were Freddie Flintoff, what would be the most empathic thing to say to Brett Lee in his moment of defeat?
Okay, we're still getting votes coming in, so we'll just leave it up for a few more seconds.
Yeah, Joel. So this was quite an easy one, judging by the responses. 96% agree with us, which is what we felt was the correct answer. The one well played is not necessarily a problem. It's just praise, okay? And praise can be helpful to people, but it's not the same as empathizing with them.
Yeah, and giving them some, like the first one, some sort of inspirational thing to make sense out of it is not really helpful either.
Brilliant.
Okay,
All
well,
right.
I've just shared the results. So as you can say, the vast majority picked that one correctly.
Well, 100% of the people definitely didn't pick the least empathic one. All right, let's jump to number 2. We have 5. Which of these acts displays empathy best? You chat with an athlete who is disappointed at being dropped from a game. Then you all right, let's solve it.
Okay, we have the votes coming in now.
These questions are too easy. Next time it's going to be super tough.
Yeah. Well.
I don't think we need to comment, Joel. I think it's fairly clear. So, yep, it's going to be interesting to see. I reckon the winner is going to be the person with the fastest fingers. Let's move on to the next one.
I'm sure some people are probably already typing the name out. All right.
Right, next one.
Let's jump to number 3. Which of these replies is the most empathic? Player, I'm done with this team. They just don't try.
I reckon this one might be a bit tougher.
We will see. There it is. That's pretty funny. Mr. O'Reilly.
And again, we find the vast majority are agreeing with us, Joel.
That's good.
Yeah.
Very, very empathically oriented group of people we got hanging out with us. We get the pleasure to hang out with is probably a better way of saying it.
The point is that that empathic listening statement to number 3 is designed to show the player that you understand what their experience is.
Yes.
You're not making a practical suggestion like we'll have a word or giving them advice like in the first one.
Imagining what they might be feeling given the words they've said.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next one. Then. Someone's going to have to have very quick fingers to win this one.
Which of these actions by a coach is the most empathic? A bus of juniors will head out to a new competition at 7 a.m. on a Sunday. Kit is a uniform for anybody in America.
Kit is uniform, yeah. Joel, I'll leave you to comment on this, and then I'll leave you and James.
I can't see the tally.
I'm
guessing that they did really well.
I'll leave you and James to announce the winner.
Yeah, this is empathy being expressed by action, without trying to convey, but imagining what these kids might be feeling, leaving to go away without their parents, as opposed to just putting them on a bus and saying, you know, it'll be good for them to harden up, teach them a lesson.
Okay, then the final one.
Which of these replies encourages the athlete to talk most constructively about improvement? I blew it. I just blew it out there. Yes, you can say that, Lorna.
Yeah, it's a bit like an echo chamber. Everybody's agreeing with everyone else. Wow. Someone changed their mind, I noticed.
Somebody already got their name up.
Have they?
They must have been very confident in their answer.
There you go.
And number 2, you know.
I like the way that's very short and sweet. You know, the person that asked, does it take time? We don't have time to empathize. I ask you, that's 5 words.
Yes. It's a skill. It's a skill you develop and it just comes online automatically. And it takes practice and it takes being in the moment with this. And there was something that Susan said a couple times about that she does what she does intentionally. And I think motivational interviewing is a very intentional interaction that you have with somebody. And empathy is a very intentional way of being with people. It's a way of communicating or expressing. So I really was inspired by what she said. And then all 3 of our guests, Steve, talked about the importance for the coach to be genuine and authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's somebody called Lorna, but she might not be the first. It's up to you, James. Someone, Niall O'Reilly's full of cheek. He says, how do you know you got 5 correct? Okay, that's not your business, Niall. Can you help us with the winner, please?
Okay, well, yeah, I think as you said, a lot of people did get them correct. So I'm just going to kind of pick one at random of the people that said they did. So there's a Matt Mills who got all 4 correct. So congratulations to Matt.
Okay. So
well done.
We have a winner. Steve, do you want to announce what they've won?
I didn't hear you. I couldn't hear you right, but you're saying, what's the prize, Joel?
Yes, I said you want to announce what the prize is.
Yeah, please do. You do.
Well, the prize is Steve is going to donate money to Guardians of the National Treasure. And that donation is going to be done in your name.
Okay, so if you could please hold that person's name, James, because I'm going to forget. But on your behalf, the first prize is going to be, I'm going to donate £25 to Guardians of the National Treasure, which we're going to introduce you to in a moment.
Well,
Okay, and I'll match that too. Yeah, so we've all made a donation, which is fantastic.
Is that right? Joel, are you in on this?
I'm in. I've doubled Joe's.
So that's £75 to Guardians of the National Treasure in your name. So many congratulations, and let us now turn finally to the Guardians of the National Treasure. And Joel, thank you so much, James, for managing that process. I will never conduct a quiz that's as easy as that again. That's for sure. Definitely a lesson learned. But look, I do get to wonder what the takeaways are from this webinar. And I think the comments that I can see coming in from people are highlighting them. That it's not just words, but your deeds, that you can do this every day in so many different ways. For me, that the best way to learn is to notice people's reactions and learn from them. That this is needed now more than ever before. And that it must be quite a journey for coaches to teach young people sportsmanship above winning at all costs, even at an elite level. So the challenges seem to be there. Now, if there's one person that I've met recently who really embodies the principles we're talking about, it's the wonderful Ralph Bovers, who is a ballet teacher, netball teacher, football coach, in a very difficult environment in a township in Cape Town called Lavender Hill. And Ralph is the CEO of the Guardians of the National Treasure. He's not able to be with us today. I asked him, and he actually sent me a message which said this: unfortunately, what's happened is a month ago, he was involved in sport. Now he's involved in feeding. That's how desperate it's got there in this gangland environment in Lavender Hill that we are going to support. He says, "Hello, Steve. I leave home 8 a.m. and I get back at 8 p.m. With the 10 feeding locations, I'm keeping fit, I promise you. Sorry I cannot be with you on time for your webinar. We've got over 40 volunteers and 3,000 plus meals every day. We are blessed since you guys came on board." Literally, he goes to the bank, the ATM, and takes the money and gets it straight out there. So James, I'm going to hand over to you to show a brief video, because I think there is a greeting from him. There you are. This was
okay.
The last one. This is the one and only Ralph.
This is just Ralph, yeah, and then we have the other video as well to share if you'd like to.
Okay. This is Ralph, guys.
Hi, good day from Cape Town. I'm Ralph Bowers, the founder of the Guardians of the National Treasure here in South Africa. I'd like to thank MI and Beyond for your generous donations. Without your help, the work we do here in the community would be impossible. With the funds we receive, we'll be buying 2 non-tack thermal tonometers. We'll be buying masks, sanitizer, gloves, so we can still support the community in terms of the safety, the social distancing will be looked at, informing people how to wash their hands. So thank you very much. And besides that, we will also then be feeding the kids and the families that need the support from us. So I'd like to thank you very, very much. And Professor Rolnick, thank you so much for all your help.
So there's the wonderful Ralph Bovers, and James has got a little video clip, I believe, about this project, and then we're going to put the URL into a box for you. Thanks, Master James. I don't know how you do it. You winning there?
Just about, one sec.
and our call today is to click a link, which you're about to get, and to make a donation or not.
Any amount, okay.
Yeah, don't be guided by our largesse. It's possible that James is going to crack this, and we'll give you just a minute.
Sorry guys, one sec. Okay, can you see the video?
Yeah. This
Fantastic.
is Lavender Hill.
If we want our youth to be the leaders for tomorrow, we need to invest in our youth now. My name is Ralph Bowers, and I'm the founder of the Guardians of the National Treasure, a transformation and an upliftment organization within the area Lavendale and Greater. I grew up in Lavendale knowing what our circumstances was then, and I decided to help these communities that's so broken and impoverished to change their lives and bring hope. Every day, one of the kids surprised me. One of the kids does something extraordinary. That's my energy for tomorrow. All these sports codes that we do is giving these kids an outlet in which to be part of something beautiful. When I'm on the soccer field, on the netball field, or ballet, when I watch these kids perform, I watch them interact with their other peers, and I can just see them glow. I can see they are children again. I don't think I want to work anywhere else in the world but work with these kids in Lavendale.
Thank you so much. And James, are you going to put a URL in?
I am, yep. I'll do that now.
It's called Guardians of the National Treasure. And for those of you working in elite sport, Ralph, who doesn't appear to have any qualifications in coaching, has nurtured a couple of players that have hit the elite level and have got serious contracts. So there's a lot of natural talent out there. And my impression is Ralph creates an environment for people to be creative and express themselves and lets them just get on with it. And I think that attitude and behavior is congruent with a lot of what we've talked about today.
One of the things I was just thinking about, Steve, is that we were talking about, and a lot of times, elite level athletes, but that's a minority of people that play sport. You know, the majority of people that play sports are kids.
Yeah.
And what Susan is doing and how people are finding a way to nurture these kids into becoming top athletes is what's been needed for a long time.
Exactly.
Because this is part of their development. It's part of how they form their identity, how they learn to develop friendships and connect with other people. And they do it from the coaches and the adults in their lives.
And Joel, I reckon you've had the last word, because our time is effectively coming up very soon. I'm just wanting to make sure that people can click a link if they want to. Hello to Jess Branch in Kenya. Such a delight to see that you're online, Jess. And lots of people are leaving messages. So I think, James, it's the case that people can click this link now.
Yeah, the link's in the chat. And when we send out the webinar recording, I'll also include that link in the follow-up that goes out too. So that'll be fantastic if people could donate.
So for a period of 3 or 4 minutes, we're going to stay online before I cut off the webinar, just to give people a chance to make contributions if they want to. But literally in 5 minutes, I'm cutting us all off. And if you've got any final comments or questions, feel free to. Mike Porteous, you're absolutely right. This guy, Ralph, has got enormous transferable skills. Incredible. I tell you, one of his transferable skills is, I've heard, he's one of the few people that can walk across that field that you saw there is known as the battlefield, because the rival gangs shoot across it. And he's occupied it. He's taken it over for children. And he's one of the few people, talk about transferable skills, Mike. he's one of the few people can walk across it from one gang to another, and everybody respects him.
You know, I think one of the things that I was kind of going through some of the comments is that one of the things I know that both you and I want to make sure that people know is we're not coming in here thinking that we are the be all and the end all of this topic about MI and sports and coaching and how to help people be the best athletes they are. Well, our goal is to try to stimulate ideas and conversation with people and between people about how things like empathy can be utilized in areas of sport and obviously other areas too.
We don't have time not to.
No, you don't.
I'm just keeping my eye on the chat.
We're getting some great feedback, so it's wonderful that people have really enjoyed what we've been able to put together tonight.
Yeah, Melvin Hillsden, in higher education, students returning. Hi, Melvin. We are thinking of putting one together in education, and have got two absolutely remarkable people to come on as guests. So I'm busy lining that up. It'll be a while though, Melvin. Lovely to know that you're online.
So do you want to announce the next couple that we have in the oven?
Oh, okay, go for it.
Well, the third one, the next one, I believe, because we've talked about a few of them, is about giving feedback.
Feedback and advice giving.
Feedback and advice giving, and across different domains of sport, classroom, work, and the consulting room.
As an art art form and a skill.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll have some guests there. And then the fourth one is inspired by our first episode around supporting autonomy. And when do you know enough is too much? And when do you know you're not doing it enough? So supporting autonomy, how long is a piece of string? I think it depends. And we'll have a couple of good guests there too for hopefully a lively conversation.
So those are the next two that's coming up. Nice to hear from you, Mike O'Brien. Nice to know you're online, man. Okay, well, I'm going to keep it open for just another minute or two in case there's any questions.
When are the next two planned for?
I think you'd better check the website, but I think it's because my memory could be wrong, but I think it's the 4th of June is the number 3, is the third one.
Yeah, we talked about doing every 3 weeks.
Yeah, greetings to you, Maxim. We should have one on praise and affirmation, and we'll have Maxim as a guest. He's got interesting ideas about the neurological experience of praise and affirmation. We might do that, Maxim. I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Well, then we also I like the idea when we were talking about doing one around resistance.
Resistance, yeah, that's probably a good subject.
Yeah.
Cheers, Richmond.
Yeah, cheers, Richmond.
Nice to know you're online, man.
We did have one question. We did have one question come in, and that's whether you can actually measure empathy. I was wondering whether you could briefly touch upon that before
Absolutely, you can.
Sign off.
Thanks, Kathy.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Absolutely, you can measure empathy. If we talk about two streams, one is through behavior and action, one is through words. As far as on the verbal front, you can not only define it and measure it and count empathic statements reliably, but it impacts outcome.
Yes.
There's a long line of research in psychology and on motivational interviewing that demonstrates that. Measuring empathy through action is quite tricky because you have to understand someone's motive for doing it. So you can't just look at their behavior. I think it's a field that's wide open to research, because you should be able to crack it. And if the wisdom of Edu and Susan and Imtiaz is anything to go by, this will predict better performance in sport. So that's a brilliant PhD for somebody who's an academic in the sports field.
You volunteering to supervise it, Steve?
No, I'm no longer an academic. As I said, when I grow up, I want to be a sports.
We'll send them to Jeff Brecken.
Yeah, Jeff Brecken will do it. Okay, guys, look, I said we're gone for 5 more minutes, and I believe we've hit that time, and there are no more questions. So, is that correct, James? Good.
Yeah, I think we're good to sign
It was
off.
a pleasure and a privilege for you to tune in with us, mate.
Okay, James, if we could reconnect once I've closed this webinar, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And
thanks, everybody. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.